This episode is brought to you by Find Me Gluten-Free, your go-to app for discovering safe, gluten-free dining options wherever you go. Whether you're traveling or just looking for a new local spot, this app helps you find restaurants with gluten-free options, read reviews from other gluten-free diners, and avoid risky places, just like our family has used this app for many years. And here's the best part. Just for the Gluten-Free Engineered listeners, you can get an exclusive $5 discount on a premium membership. Head on over to theglutenfreeengineer.com/find me gluten free or check the show notes to grab your deal and make dining out stress free, because eating out gluten free shouldn't be a guessing game. Quick reminder before we get started on this episode: this podcast is based on my personal experiences and isn't medical advice. Today, I'm so excited to bring you a powerful and encouraging conversation with Katy Harvey, a non-diet dietitian, intuitive eating expert, and host of the Rebuilding Your Trust with Your Body podcast. Katy helps women break free from diet culture, stress less about food, and make peace with their bodies. In this episode, we're diving into the intersection of intuitive eating and the gluten-free lifestyle, because yes, you can honor your health, eat the foods you love, and feel good about your body all at the same time. We'll talk about how going gluten-free can affect your relationship with food, common mistakes people make when they start eating gluten-free, and how to approach nutrition without falling into a diet mentality. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by what you should or shouldn't eat, or wondered if intuitive eating is even possible when you have to be gluten-free, this episode is for you. Welcome to the Gluten-Free Engineer podcast. I'm your host, Carrie Saunders. In 2011, I was diagnosed with celiac disease, a moment that changed everything. But I was determined not to let it hold me back. With my 2 engineering degrees, I set out to reverse engineer the gluten-free lifestyle, breaking down recipes, safety tips, travel hacks, and everything in between to rebuild a life I love. Whether you have celiac disease, gluten intolerance, or simply choose to live gluten-free, this podcast is for you. Join me each week as we simplify the gluten-free lifestyle, make it fun, and prove that you don't have to miss out on anything. Welcome back to the show. Today we have a special guest with us. Her name is Katy Harvey, and she is a Midwest girl, a non-diet dietitian, and the host of Rebuilding Your Trust with Your Body podcast. She specializes in intuitive eating and helping women ditch dieting. So welcome to the show today, Katy. I'm so glad to have you on our podcast.
Oh my gosh, I'm so thrilled to be here. I cannot wait for this conversation.
So tell us a little bit more about you. I've, gave a little brief introduction, but I know there's more behind Katy. So tell us a little bit more about you.
Oh, of course. Yeah. So I grew up in Iowa. I live in Kansas City. Um, and as far as my background, I am a registered dietitian, but I always present myself to people as I'm a non-diet dietitian, because usually when people first hear dietitian, they're like, oh my gosh, you're going to put me on a diet. And they just think that that's basically all we do is put people on diets and help them lose weight. And so I take a very different approach. I take a non-diet approach because what we know is that dieting actually does not work long-term for the vast majority of people. But I care very much about helping you honor your health and to feel good in your body and about your body. And so I focus a lot on our relationship with food and why we're eating what we're eating, how we're feeling about it, how we're feeling about our bodies. And I do that through the lens of intuitive eating is kind of my shtick. And it's my framework that I use with most of my clients. So as far as my work, I have a private practice where I work with people individually. And then I have online courses and programs where I work with people from all across the world, which is so much fun.
So I love that you help people with their relationship with food, because I know our listeners most of them are celiac or they're gluten intolerant or they choose to be gluten-free for another health reason. And I even have a podcast episode, a few episodes back about, what does it do to you when you find that you have to, be gluten-free? It can be a grieving process and anger behind it too. So I love that you come at it with a way that we're looking at a relationship with food, because I think that's really important, because we can be bitter on a situation like that, or we could also, just have an unhealthy relationship in a different direction. So what do you see the role that a diet culture plays in our relationship with this food?
It's so complicated. And I would say, I mean, diet culture is so pervasive. Like for all of us who are alive and breathing today, we were born into a world that already subscribed to the idea that thin is good and fat is bad. And our ideas about how to accomplish thinness and avoid fatness have, they kind of ebb and flow. It's like, oh, low fat, but then we changed our mind, no, low carb, and now intermittent fasting. And so the the actual diets themselves are kind of a moving target, but that underlying premise that thinness means that you are being good, you are being healthy, you are being virtuous, you are being successful, and that fatness means the opposite of all of those things is kind of like the core belief system that diet culture is built around. And then what I have seen a lot in the past decade or so is the entering of wellness culture center stage. So now it's not always so much about, oh, we need to go on a diet and lose weight, because a lot of people have caught on to the reality that diets don't really work. And it's like, well, this isn't a diet, it's a lifestyle change. And now there's all these ideas of what we need to be doing to get healthy. And in my podcast, I have this segment that I do, I call it Wellness Woo, where I'll break down these things that are just like pseudoscientific kind of nonsense, or things where the claims have just been vastly over exaggerated. And I actually see, we can talk about this more if you want to, but I actually see the gluten-free recommendation a lot in the wellness woo space. That like there, 1,000,000%, there are times that people can benefit from or need to be avoiding gluten. There are also a lot of things where people are told they should do that and it's utter nonsense and it's not necessary. And I don't believe in doing unnecessary restrictions with food, because I think that negatively impacts our relationship with food. So this diet culture thing and this wellness culture thing, I mean, it's just so baked into everything all around us, and it's hard to escape from it.
I think it really is, and I think also, from a little bit of what you said there is like sometimes that also makes it hard for those that do actually need to be gluten free safely, because people think it's just a fad that you're doing or something like that, or you're trying to be special, or so that can really affect, I feel like, our psychology with food, especially those for celiac or those that need to be off of it for health reasons. It can be, you can
Right.
almost feel like an outcast.
Or that thing where it's like, people might be throwing around the phrase gluten-free sort of loosely, or saying that they are, that something they made is, but if they don't truly understand, like with celiac, what it means, that like you can't be cross-contaminating or anything. And
Mhm.
there's gluten-free as far as kind of like more of the trend, or like kind of the diety version of it. And then there's gluten-free of like the protocol that needs to be followed medically. And then there's, kind of in between areas with that as well. But yeah, it can be sort of invalidating or even at times dangerous for people who truly need to be gluten-free.
Yes, I know I have gotten as a celiac gluten accidentally, especially in the beginning when I didn't understand the protocol and or my friends or family didn't understand, the protocol of the cross contact or cross contamination. And, I would get sick from it, or one of my kids would get sick from it who also are celiac too. So I know as a dietitian, what do you see some of the biggest mistakes and misconceptions people have about going gluten free? We kind of touched on it a little bit, but can you go a little deeper there?
I think one of the biggest ones is the idea that being gluten-free is just inherently a healthier lifestyle. The way that it's talked about in culture implies that if you're not eating gluten, that you're like trying to be healthier. And so then, the unspoken part of that is that, oh, that must mean gluten is unhealthy. And for a lot of people, if you ask them like, what is gluten? They have no idea, but they're avoiding it, right? And so I like to tell people that, okay, if you're not eating gluten, that doesn't make your diet inherently healthier. And in fact, a lot of people who cut gluten out, it's like the what they end up eating is not necessarily giving them the balance and variety and nutrition that they need. So I think that's one thing, is just this like global assumption that it's a healthy lifestyle in and of itself that we should all be striving for, as if gluten is somehow bad for us just universally as humans, which it's not. Like yes, there are some people whose bodies don't react well to it, but that doesn't mean that everybody should be avoiding it or trying to minimize it for any reason. So I think that that's sort of the biggest global misunderstanding that I see in the gluten-free space.
Well, and what I found too is that a lot of people who go gluten free, whether it's, because they have to or not, they replace those gluten items with gluten-free processed food too. And I talk about that on our podcast. That's not necessarily healthier. You're going to be much healthier if you're replacing it with whole foods that are naturally gluten-free and you're eating a variety of fruits and vegetables and, proteins and things like that that are actually already, naturally gluten-free, and replacing that donut that's, that has full of gluten with a gluten-free donut is not any better unless you medically need it,
And I think so many people think like, oh, this gluten-free donut, like this is more virtuous than a regular donut. And
Yeah.
I mean, really, they're basically the same thing otherwise. It's like not a significant swap, really.
Right. Yeah. And I talk about sometimes, and I'm sure you can probably back this up too, that gluten foods are fortified with certain vitamins that we as Americans don't naturally eat because we're not eating a good variety in our diet. So replacing them with the gluten-free component without being conscious of the fact that that's not usually fortified like the gluten components are, and that we really need to look at our diet as a whole when we are gluten free to make sure that we're getting those vitamins and minerals that we tend to not eat in
For sure.
America
And that
because we're
is
not
such
eating.
an important point. Yeah. I mean, I think about like a lot of the gluten containing foods, they are fortified with B vitamins, folate, sometimes iron, even, which obviously we can get iron from meat and stuff. But like folate in particular, a lot of people do not get enough of. And one of our main sources of it, a good example is breakfast cereal.
So then let's say that somebody does need to be gluten free. They're listening to the podcast, they're celiac or they're gluten intolerant for some other reason, maybe they have a gluten intolerance in general, or they need to be off gluten because it helps with different autoimmune disease. How would you recommend getting those vitamins that are not in these our foods aren't fortified with them? So how would you recommend getting those vitamins? Would it be through supplementation or would it be through specific other foods that are naturally gluten free?
I lean more towards other foods when possible. There's a time and place for supplements, but the vast majority of supplements that people take are a complete waste of money. And big supplement, we all talk about big pharma. Big supplement is its own beast. It's $1 billion industry, multi-billion dollar, and a lot of it's basically a scam. It's so many people are just creating expensive pee for themselves through supplements. And one of my issues with supplements is like, okay, best case scenario, they are treating a deficiency or keeping you from getting a deficiency, and they're doing something positive for your health. Worst case scenario, it's causing you actual harm. And then most of what happens is somewhere in between where it's basically doing nothing or very little for you. And people, because it's completely unregulated by any governing body, like the FDA does not oversee it. So there is no guarantee that's what is in those supplement bottles is actually what it says on the bottle or in that dose, or that there's not other things added. And that's an important point from a gluten standpoint, because some of those things can contain gluten that you may not be aware of, and you have to pay attention for that. Um, Supplements can also interact with medications, for example. So I caution people with supplements. Again, there is a time and place, absolutely, but I don't like to just sort of say, let's replace food with supplements and not worry about the nutrition that we're eating, because there's also a lot of benefit to getting the nutrients from food. Because when we're eating these foods, we're also getting the other nutrients that come along with it in that food. So you're not just getting the single thing like you would in a supplement. You're getting, like plant foods, for example, you're getting the other phytonutrients that are in there. You might be getting some fiber, which is really important. So when possible, to get it from food for sure. And then if you're not getting enough, supplement is like, let's think about what the word supplement means. It means to, like, in addition to, or to kind of make up for, not to replace.
I think that's a great point. And I think a lot of people don't think about that and they just go for the quick fix, get that supplement. And I know in my
And it's like
experience,
supplements are
yeah.
sort of positioned as healthy, right? So it's that same
Right,
thing. Like,
right.
I'm being gluten free and I'm taking all these supplements and I'm being so healthy.
Right. Well, and I know in my experience, when I have had to supplement, if I really have to dig and find that supplement that is more bioavailable too. And usually that's going to be the supplement where you have to take more of the supplement than the ones that come from basically the pharmaceutical-ish type of companies where they're really concentrated in small pills and they don't actually have, you know, a bit more natural version of that vitamin within the pill. And many times I found, those supplements that I do actually notice a difference on, I have to take, 3 or 4 pills across the whole day to actually get the nutrients. And I actually can see a difference versus, the ones that are just generic or, highly concentrated or something. They just
For
aren't
sure.
as
I'm sure
bioavailable.
there's probably people listening who it's like, oh my gosh, they've got like their big like cabinet full of supplements or like their pill sorter. And it's like taking your supplements as a full-time job because you're like, okay, I've got to like stay on this schedule and I have to take this many of them. And it can become a lot to manage too.
It really can. And I feel like, anybody listening who might be questioning, am I doing the right thing with supplementation? I would encourage you to work with your doctor and a dietitian like Katie.
Sure,
And
yeah. Like as a dietitian, a lot of times clients will send me their supplement list and they'll be like, "Can you just help me sift through this and like tell me, okay, what should I be taking? What could I let go of?" And we can usually whittle down a decent chunk of them. And then there may be a few core ones that we keep. So that's a great use for a dietitian because it's really our wheelhouse is to be able to look at those different micronutrients and stuff and other types of supplements as well to kind of gauge like what's helping and not helping. And yes, we may need to kind of work with your doctor too to figure out what would be necessary and safe medically.
right. And I know that many supplements and some people listening may not understand this or know this. They need another vitamin with them to be more bioavailable. And that's something that a dietitian like you can help them with, because we absorb calcium better when we have some of the other vitamins that naturally
Here,
come
yes, iron
when
with
you're
vitamin C. Yeah, exactly.
right. Yeah. And so
Exactly.
if you don't know what you're doing with supplementation, you could be, like you said, just wasting your money and wasting your time. Um,
Let me give you another example too of kind of the dark side. Like my own mother at one point was taking green tea supplement. Green tea, it's so healthy. This supplement must be so healthy. It gave her liver damage. Her doctor's like, "Why are your liver enzymes so high?" And they were looking at everything she's taking, and lo and behold, this green tea supplement was the culprit. And it turns out that's a fairly common thing that happens. So again, like just because it's a supplement or it's natural or it's a a vitamin, it doesn't mean that it's safe. And also we have to consider what's the dosage and so many things. So I would encourage people to not just go willy-nilly putting yourself on supplements. Like do it with the expertise of somebody who knows what they're doing.
For sure, because we're not experts. Most of us listening aren't experts in diet, nutrition, and or a doctor. So I completely agree with you that checking with a dietitian and or your doctor, and many times, especially the dietitian, because sometimes the doctors don't have the time or resources to be looking into that unless they're more of a holistic doctor as well. So I feel
That's
like it.
true. And yeah, a lot of people don't realize that doctors in med school get almost zero nutrition. They might get like a 3 hour lecture on nutrition. It's a very minimal part of their training. And so, just like I don't walk around pretending to be a surgeon or to know how to do that. I wish there's some doctors who are very good about saying, yes, please go see a dietitian. But some doctors are just like given this off the wall nutrition advice. And I'm like, okay, hold on. And that's another thing too of like just because a doctor wrote a book, let's say, it doesn't that's about diet, it does not mean that that's actually sound advice because it's really not their training. It's not necessarily their expertise unless they do have additional training in nutrition.
So then let's go back to going gluten free and how it affects our relationship with food. So maybe you can speak a little bit to more towards those who are celiac or have to be gluten free for other reasons. How can we help them have a good healthy relationship and not feel um, what's the word I want to come up with? Like where they feel mad or upset that they have to do this diet change and they have this, anger type of relationship with food because they're having to upheave their whole, way of life and change their complete diet. So how do you help them repair that relationship with food whenever they do have to go off of gluten.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think there's like different camps of people who end up gluten-free where sometimes it's kind of forced upon them with a diagnosis. And then there's just, people maybe more by choice. And when it's by choice, a lot of times it feels more like a positive change in their life. When you get that celiac diagnosis, let's say, and it rocks your world and you're told you can't have gluten. And not only you can't have it, like, or you can have a little bit of, it's like, no, like you can't have it, and you need to be pretty darn diligent about that. You used the word grief earlier. It's a grieving process, and people will often go through the stages of grief, maybe denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then ultimately acceptance. And it's so important that you're allowing yourself to experience each of those phases. It's not necessarily going to go in that order. You might cycle back through some of them, and that it's such a valid thing because it takes away a lot of the freedom that you have to just kind of go live life and do whatever. I'm thinking of this weekend, my son's having his birthday party at this trampoline park. So the trampoline park is providing pizza and cookie cake. Well, if a celiac kid is coming to this party, they can't just eat pizza and cookie cake. So what do? Are they going to not come to the party? Are they going to come and bring their own food? Are they going to come and not eat? Like all three of those scenarios kind of suck. And it's same for us as adults. Like it limits what you can choose at a restaurant. You may have times where you're inadvertently getting exposed and you're getting sick. Um, I mean, even the way you have to operate your kitchen, if you live with other people, you're going to have like a separate toaster or make sure you're not cross-contaminating. And you're just having to think through so many things that most people don't have to think about deeply on a daily basis. And that's a lot. So self-compassion for that, like validating your experience and letting yourself acknowledge those emotions and affirm for yourself that, of course, this is hard. Yes, this is hard. And it is an act of self-care to do what you need to do to take care of your body in that way.
Well, I think that, as you were talking there, it is such a mental load to have to be
Mhm.
constantly thinking about how do I eat when I go to this place? When you bring up the pizza thing, that like puts a big red flag in front of in my brain because there's been so many times I've been glutened because there is pizza at a party and the kids have the pizza greasy fingers and it goes everywhere. And, you end up touching a surface that they've got it. And then you eat something gluten free with your hands and boom, now you've got gluten a little bit. Because the pizza grease, I feel like carries gluten like nothing else out there.
The
So
gluten
yeah,
transporter.
it is. It's like a gluten transporter. That grease just like carries it along. And so, it's mentally taxing. And I think we need to, like you said, give ourselves grace, especially once we've gotten past the grieving stages and give ourselves grace and um that we have this higher mental load on ourselves
Yep.
whenever we are either celiac ourselves or need to be gluten free for other medical reasons or our children are, and in our family it's both. We've all three of our children have it and I have it, and
Oh my.
honestly my dad was diagnosed with it and I found out after he passed away. He denied it for over 10 years and didn't tell anybody. His wife didn't even know. He didn't tell me. I told him to be tested, both my parents, whenever I found out I had celiac and our kids too. He completely denied it until he passed. And I found it in his medical records after he passed. So
Oh
denial
my.
is real. I
Wow. And
know.
denial can be huge. Yeah,
Yes. Denial and grief can be so real.
for sure. I'd love to also speak to or about the person who may have decided to cut out gluten as a byproduct of some issues in their relationship with food. So I work with a lot of folks who have disordered eating and eating disorders. And this is a theme that I see over and over again. People choosing to go gluten free essentially as a form of restriction, of trying to control their food and to be able to potentially lose weight and it becomes sort of a way to maybe avoid things like cookies and brownies and pizza and things that they feel like they shouldn't be eating or that they don't deserve to eat. So it's like, well, if I just go gluten-free, then that kind of like takes care of that problem. And they don't necessarily medically need to be gluten-free. And oftentimes, for that individual, part of healing their relationship with food and recovering from that disordered eating is going to be the reintroduction of gluten foods and making peace with those foods. And so I feel fairly certain that there may be some of those folks who are listening to this. And then you may have some folks who are kind of in between who are like, I thought I needed to be gluten-free, but I don't have a diagnosis officially. Maybe I feel better when I don't eat it, but I guess I don't know for sure. Like I've worked with a lot of those people who are sort of in between. And especially if you're having a lot of like GI issues and stuff, sometimes people are like, is it the gluten? Because we hear so much about that, or is it dairy or whatever? And that's where, again, working with a dietitian can be really helpful because sometimes it's like once we kind of heal your gut and get things back in working order, people are surprised, like, oh, actually, I can tolerate these things that I didn't think that I could. And it might be sort of scary if they've been avoiding those foods because they feel guilty when they eat them. But once you make peace with food and you realize you don't have to cling on to all these restrictions, it's just like life is so much easier and you have so much more freedom and flexibility. So.
Well, and to play off that, I know that for me, I'm approaching 50s here soon. A lot of people are like, you are just like till 29 when I look at you, I'm like, no, I'm actually 48. But I know for me, I struggle to lose some extra belly fat and being gluten free, I'm already, because I'm celiac, I'm already restricted on what I eat. And you teach a lot about intuitive eating. So if somebody's listening and they have to be gluten free and they do want to lose some weight, but they don't want to diet because they realize, they're older like me and they realize, oh, this doesn't actually, it only temporarily works and it doesn't really work long term. How would you advise them to like help them do intuitive eating so that they fuel their body appropriately, so they feel comfortable in their body and maybe lose a little bit of extra weight if they need to do that, but real ultimately have a good relationship with food and are just, eating by intuition. What does that actually mean and how would somebody do that?
Oh, absolutely. I'm like so excited because this is my wheelhouse. So, I'm going to kind of break apart a few components of what you asked about. So, the first aspect, people will sometimes come to me and they'll say, I'm interested in intuitive eating, but I probably can't do that because I have to follow this like kind of medical type of dietary restriction. So, in this case, gluten, but I hear it a lot also from people with like diabetes or food allergies or whatever. So, they'll say like, can I eat intuitively when I can't have a cupcake that has gluten in it if intuitively I want it? Like I'm not supposed to do that. So how is that intuitive eating? And my answer to that is yes, 1,000,000%. We can follow dietary restrictions with intuitive eating when we look at it through the lens that part of eating intuitively is honoring your body's medical needs. That we think a lot of people hear intuitive eating and they kind of misunderstand what it means. Some people think it means eat whatever you want whenever you want. That's not intuitive eating, that's impulsive eating. Some people think intuitive eating is just eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full. And hunger and fullness are part of it. They're within the intuitive eating framework, there's 10 principles, and hunger and fullness are two of them, but that's 20%. The other 80% has a lot to do with how we think about food and health and nutrition in our bodies. And so we would think about, okay, yes, we want to honor hunger and fullness. We want to choose satisfying foods, but also part of listening to your body is listening to your medical data, listening to the fact that if your body is saying it cannot tolerate gluten, then you should not be eating gluten. And so we would look at it as like that is listening to your body. And then if you are craving things like desserts, let's find some gluten-free ways to incorporate those that are enjoyable for you. So there's that aspect that intuitive eating is still a beautiful framework, even when you have to have gentle nutrition modifications, is what we call those. And then when it comes to kind of like the body image stuff and like, well, what do I do if I know dieting doesn't work, but I kind of want to lose some weight? So I want to speak a little bit more to this concept that dieting doesn't work and what we mean by that. So What we know is that a person can go on pretty much any diet. It doesn't matter if it's the cookie diet, the cabbage soup diet, Weight Watchers, keto, intermittent fasting, whatever. You can go on any of them, and you probably will lose some weight initially. But the problem is, within 2 to 5 years, about 95% of people have regained that weight. And for two-thirds of those people, they've regained more than they lost, which is what makes dieting itself the number one predictor of weight gain, not weight loss. So the other problem with that is when we yo-yo, when our weight goes up and down over and over again, we call it weight cycling. And that weight cycling itself is actually very hard on your body and your health and your metabolism. And weight cycling correlates with increased risk of heart disease and increased risk of early death. So when I tell people, like, we have got to get you off the dieting roller coaster, that is what I mean. We don't want to be yo-yoing up and down. So we want to look at, how do you eat in a way that allows you to live life without feeling crazy and obsessed about food all the time? Because when you're depriving yourself, that is what will happen. And how do you do that where you can also honor your health and maintain a stable body weight that is appropriate for your body and your genetics at this phase of life? Because it does change throughout life. Sometimes I have people who are, like in their 50s or even their 60s, who think that they should weigh what they did at like 25. And I'm like, okay, that's an unrealistic expectation. So for women in particular, when we approach that menopause change where it's like puberty part two and our hormones are shifting, that's another wellness woo thing, by the way, is like all this hormone balancing stuff and preying on women who are perimenopausal, of like, here's my special diet program and supplements and exercises that are going to get rid of your belly fat. It's utter nonsense, because part of what's happening when we go through menopause is we are experiencing a decrease in our estrogen production. Your ovaries are shutting down. You're not secreting estrogen. Well, your body loves estrogen. And estrogen is good for your bones. It's good for your heart. And that's why postmenopausal women are at higher risk for heart disease and osteoporosis. And so your body's actually really smart. And it goes, well, if my ovaries aren't giving me enough estrogen, is there another way to get some of it? And turns out belly fat secretes estrogen. So this belly fat that we experience when we go through menopause is quite literally like your body taking care of you. It actually has some health benefits, and it's often a futile effort to try and fight against it because your body's not going to want to get rid of it. So as hard as it is, because our culture does not like round bellies on women, or that belly pooch, or however you want to think of it, it's very much seen as like not the aesthetic ideal. And then we hear all this stuff about the dangers of abdominal adipose tissue, blah, blah, blah. And you have to look at context and nuance with that. So, when we're specifically talking about women going through menopause, like, this is a very expected, normal, and even beneficial change. And it can be so hard to tolerate and accept that. So I never promise any of my clients weight loss. What I tell them is, when you step away from dieting, when you want to make peace with food, when you want to have a positive relationship with your body and honor your health, you might gain weight, you might lose weight, you might stay the same. And what happens with your weight very much is going to depend on where you're currently at in relation to where your body kind of wants to be. And then it's also going to depend on how are things going as you're implementing intuitive eating. Because a lot of people who wing it and try, I call it DIYing it with intuitive eating. They're like watching the YouTube videos and listening to the podcasts. They're implementing it incorrectly is maybe the most simple way to put it. I see a lot of the impulsive eating, just like, oh, I thought I was doing intuitive eating because I was eating whatever I wanted. Well, that's not listening to your body. That's just eating whatever pops into your head. Or they're not really, they might be including some of the foods that they use to restrict when they're dieting, but they're still feeling guilty and they're still judging it and they're thinking of it as crap and junk and blah, blah, blah. And what that's doing is actually increasing the drive for overconsumption of those foods. So we've got to do the mental work as well. So anyway, I mean, that's a very long-winded answer to the complexities of that question, but I hope that this gives people something to really think about and that they can kind of see themselves in it too.
I think that's really well explained, honestly, because I came into this podcast interview not knowing much about what intuitive eating was. And so I love how you really broke that down and made it, kind of a little bit more piece by piece, and that there's a lot of mental to it, which makes a lot of sense, when you think about it. Um, and that, we need to listen to our bodies and listen to our brain some, but like not quite overdo it, kind of like how you're talking about where we can be overindulging instead. So I love how you really broke that down. So for those listening who might be interested in more information about intuitive eating or getting a hold of you or connecting with you more, what are some best ways for them to reach out to you and learn more about intuitive eating and the services that you provide?
Oh, of course, I would love that. So, probably the best place to come hang out would be my Facebook group. So, I have a Facebook group called Intuitive Eating Made Easy, and I am in there every day. I am currently the only admin, the only moderator, and it's a safe group. What I always tell people, I run a tight ship. There, we don't do big drama or anything, and so it's a wonderful, supportive, compassionate community. And I do a lot of, kind of mini trainings and education and resources in there. And for people who are on Instagram, you can always find me over there as well. I'm at katyharvey.rd.
Nice. And then, so you also mentioned you have some courses too on this. What are the courses that you have on intuitive eating?
Yeah, so I have one. It's called Stepping Off the Dieting Roller Coaster. And that one is perfect for the person who's kind of like, okay, I think I'm ready to not do the dieting thing anymore, but I'm also scared because I'm scared I'm going to gain weight. And I think I might want to try this intuitive eating thing, but I don't know exactly what to do or how to do it like kind of right from the get-go. It's perfect for that person because I show you how to make that transition without it going off the rails. And that's kind of a mini course, so you can get through it pretty quickly. And then my more robust 10-week program, it's a group coaching program and a course, is called Non-Diet Academy. And that's where we're getting in there and we're really kind of overhauling your entire relationship with food. We're healing your metabolism. We're implementing intuitive eating. We're looking at emotional eating and body image and your relationship with exercise. So if you're the person who's like, I need the whole shebang, that would be more of where I would steer you.
I love that. I love how you really incorporate the mental aspect into it, because that is really, I feel like, the long-term way to be healthier with food is you've got to heal that relationship emotionally and mentally with your food. So I love that
A
you have a
million
course
percent. Yes.
that covers that. Yeah,
Totally
because
agree with
that's one of the reasons why diets don't work. It's just a band-aid,
Yeah, you
for
can white
example.
knuckle the behaviors for a while, and
Right.
eventually your body's going to override that because it works against your biology, not with it. And so the way I frame it, to people is like, let's learn how to work with your body instead. And that way it becomes something you can sustain for a lifetime.
That's great. So I really appreciate you having you on our show and teaching us a bit more about intuitive eating and, all the complexities that nutrition can be there when you have celiac or gluten intolerance. So I appreciate you being on our show.
Oh, absolutely. This was great. And I just want to say, like, what you are doing here is so important to have a space for these discussions. And I know people who are trying to be gluten free. I mean, it can be very overwhelming. It can be very lonely. And so to be able to realize, okay, I'm not alone. And there's a place to just have these conversations and to kind of process all of it and even getting new ideas and whatever. So I want to, kind of cheer you on because I think you're doing incredible things.
Thank you so much, Katie. Well, I hope you loved that conversation with Katie as much as I did. She brings so much clarity and compassion to a topic that many of us struggle with, especially when you're navigating something like celiac disease or gluten intolerance. Here's your reminder: you're allowed to enjoy food. You can be gluten free without being stuck in food fear or diet rules, and you're worthy of feeling good in your body. If you want to hear more about Katie, be sure to check out her podcast, Rebuilding Trust with Your Body. It's full of practical advice and thoughtful encouragement for anyone looking to break free from diet culture. And as always, you can find more links to Katie and other resources at our website, theglutenfreeengineer.com, and we will see you next week. The Gluten-Free Engineer podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. I share my personal experiences and stories about living with celiac disease and navigating a gluten-free lifestyle. This podcast does not provide medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional for medical questions, concerns, or advice specific to your health.